Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm going slide less. By 1500, everybody's seen enough PowerPoint, I think. By having been in anything around government, you've seen enough PowerPoint. So I'm going to challenge myself to give an interesting conversational approach to talk about something very complicated and see if we can do it without PowerPoint. So it's unorthodox to start with. First off, it's great to be back here at APL. I was just talking to one of my colleagues, Mike. We were here exactly 1 month ago doing a keynote for the Submarine Technology Symposium about AUKUS. So, you know, the US, Australia, and the UK are going to build a joint submarine program. And I like when I go in the afternoon to kind of bring together things from the morning. So one of the things Chris Cleary was talking about from this morning was the B-2 goes and makes a really dramatic mission. I grew up in a bomber town. I grew up in Abilene, Texas, with Dias Air Force and B-1s, right? So I'm good on the kind of bomber mafia stuff. And so, the B-2s go do something pretty exciting. All of a sudden, we're like, yeah, we should definitely fund the next bomber. Chris is making the point, right, that we don't do a good enough job kind of articulating the role of cyber in high-level warfare. And so what we're going to talk about is the role of digitization in warfare. Right? What are wars that we lost? And so what I was doing last week, a month ago, was pretty much just yelling at submarine admirals from 3 different countries about the fact that I was the closing keynote on day 3. Luckily, they had the CNO right after me, so everybody was in the room still, right? But about the fact that it was 3 days and 40 speakers before there had been a software architecture guy get up there, and we're going to invest billions in shipbuilding in the United States over the coming years. There's billions programmed into the new maritime industrial base. But a warship or a tank or a fighter is about half metal and half code at this point. And if the half code part doesn't work, it's a barge. And if the half code part works, it's a warship or a combat submarine or an unmanned combat submarine, right? And so when we think about shipbuilding and military procurement and production at ACAT level 1, a bomber is as much a cyber project as it is radar cross-section reduction truck. But we aren't advertising it that way. So the cyber professionals that are part of producing ACAT-1 weapon systems actually need to celebrate that work as much as we regularly celebrate DCO and OCO and those sorts of things. So I want to talk about 3 digital wars. And I come at this perspective from having had the pleasure of running the Navy's Center for Cyber Warfare R&D out at the Naval Postgraduate School for my last 4 years on active duty, under which we didn't do hardly any work for the Navy. It was mostly all 3-letter agency, early stage OCO capability, proof of concept, and then that goes super classified and forget about it and try and prove something else is possible work. So did that for a long time. But the coolest part wasn't just the tech, it was the community, which is one of the reasons I love the MCPA and Joe Billingsley and the crew's focus on community. And part of that community was this guy named Larry Reeves. Larry was the president of the Armed Forces Communications Electronics Association for the Silicon Valley Monterey Bay chapter. And Larry and I used to give an award once a quarter to the best graduate or PhD students research coming out of the Naval Postgraduate School. And so, but that was an interdisciplinary award. We gave it to Army guys, Marine once. Navy guys. Anyway, it was great. But the coolest thing that Larry did was Larry had been in Silicon Valley from before it was Silicon Valley. Larry was there when it was the defense electronics industry. They got started when we couldn't get radio, vacuum tubes over the Rocky Mountains in World War II. So they had to fund vacuum tube production in the Central Valley area to generate the vacuum tubes we needed to make radar in World War II. And then from there, the defense electronics industry just springboard. And then in 1978, Kleiner Perkins invented venture capital, right? And then venture capital just kind of took over the narrative, and that became what was the Silicon Valley. But the Silicon Valley was really the defense electronics industry right up until the mid-'80s. And so what was cool about Larry is he had been there from the beginning. He worked at Ford Aerospace, and then he worked at Sunnyvale Lockheed and a few others. And so Larry knew everybody that had ever done anything in the early days of the defense electronics industry, including rather important things like inventing transistors and the first microchips and the internet. And so Larry would always want me to give a talk about the state of the defense electronics industry to all of his friends who were all retired from MIT and Stanford and everything. So I got to meet all of the original like scions of the internet and hear their perspective on the relationship between technology and defense. So it was kind of gave me a really kind of high level perspective about what they thought about the stuff that they invented. And one of the coolest stories was from the PM and the CTO, equivalently called what we would call CTO now, of ARPANET. And so I got to meet them and have dinner with them one time and talk about, hey, what was your security paradigm when you built ARPANET, right? And I got a head shake over here who knows the story. The purpose of ARPANET was for nuclear command and control to build a routing system that wasn't reliant on switched telephone networks to make sure that nuclear command and control signals arrived between the National Command Authority and launch teams, all of which who had their own crypto and security procedures. So there was no security requirement in the development of ARPANET because what was presumed to be two communicators brought their own security requirements, paradigms, and crypto with them. And so we ended up with the ARPANET that we then turned over to the internet, that then we opened up to the world. And then we decided to take an engineering idea with no security concept in it whatsoever, and then make that the foundation of modern civilization. Right? And then when we took that bad idea, we injected value into that system in three different ways. We put almost all of the economic value of the world on top of that system. We put almost all of Western creativity and trade and manufacturing secrets on top of that system. And then we built our entire digital personal lives on top of that system. And it's not going so well because of that, right? So I kind of opine that there have been two digital wars that we've lost that don't even really get thought of that way. I think our adversaries who've won these wars read Sun Tzu and are aware that the best battle you never fought is the one the enemy didn't realize was going on, as paraphrased. And so I'm going to talk to you about two incredibly impactful digital wars that we lost and the one that's coming, and where cybersecurity, but really like digital innovation as an element plays into that, and what we ought to think about doing this time around to not lose the third one, because the third one becomes existential, right? So the first digital war, and let's also categorize what is a war and what is a battle. Like the United States does not lose battles. It's been a long, long time since the United States has had a named operation that didn't go our way. So whether it was Stuxnet that got brought up this morning, I think ORT, Operation Rolling Tide got brought up this morning as well. Like it's very difficult to come up with a named operation that didn't go our way because we don't lose battles. I was a Navy vet. I was in the Navy for 23 years. I did 9 combat deployments, including a significant amount of ground time in Iraq. And I can't think of a battle that we lost in Iraq or Afghanistan, but we lost 2 wars. So the United States is traditionally really, really good at winning battles and is lost. We're kind of like 0-3, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan on actually winning wars. So we ought to think about in this discussion, what is the difference between a battle, something that we're pretty good at winning like ORT or delivering a capability, even what we did last week with bombing Iran again. And what is a war? Right, a war is something that is the culmination of all the elements of national power that yields a desired outcome at the geostrategic political level that changes the power balance between 2 nation states, right? So the first war that we fundamentally lost was the war to protect the economic engine of Western civilization. So the United States and Europe, for the entire period from the end of World War II until the early 2000s, was the unquestioned economic engine of growth in the world. Right? We, the United States and Europe, made everything that everybody in the world wanted to buy. And then we brought on, Korea and Japan and a few other countries into that coalition of the engine of the world's economic progress. And we lost it all to China. The entire reason we are in a near-peer competition with China is because they stole our economic model remonetized it against their affordable, cheap workforce, and successfully altered the geopolitical economic balance of the world. So now we find ourselves in a near-peer competition because they stole every secret we ever had about how we make anything for trade secrets, or the patents and technology for how we make it. So the first digital war, and they stole it all via cyber. Like, everybody in here knows how they stole it, right? That's almost tacit in this room. So we lost the digital war to protect the economy of Western civilization, and allowed the rise of ideological adversaries to actually have an economic engine to actually rival us on a world stage. The second war we lost is we founded this country and Western civilization on the idea of individual freedom, and the idea, and we have lost the protection and the expectation of digital privacy and personal economic digital security, right? I can go anywhere. Like, I just saw Mission Impossible the other day, right? The new one, and you know, one of the whole themes of it is this group of really smart hackers up in Boston can actually go into your home and turn the volume on the TV up and look at you through the Ring camera and take over the camera in your laptop, right? Because everybody in the country believes that's happening, and in some cases it's true. Right? So we have lost an expectation of privacy in the digital world because of that. Everybody expects that at least once or twice a decade you're going to get your identity or digital identity stolen. Everybody expects their credit cards are going to get scammed and swiped. And think about this. My mom, who's in her mid-70s, gets no less than 10 or 12 Eastern European or Eastern Asian spam, phishing, cyber, confidence attacks on her every single day. If there were 10 con artists like trying to break into her house and scam her at her car on her way out of the grocery store, like, we wouldn't stand for that. The system would not allow like senior citizens to be exploited that way. But the system we've built in the digital world is just okay with exposing vulnerable populations to high-risk activity. So we have effectively lost the war for individual digital economic security and digital economic prosperity. It's not in keeping with our core values. When I phrased it like this, everybody kind of nods their head like, damn, that's really bad. That's because it's really bad. Right? And so that's the second digital war we've lost. And you've lost a war when nobody's actually trying. Like, there's a bunch of awesome sponsors for here, and I'm glad they're here. But the truth is, if the conga line of things that we add to create defense in depth actually worked, then cybercrime wouldn't have made more money last year globally than Uber did. Right? Cybercrime made more money than Uber. Uber is I travel all over the world. Uber is in every city, every major city of the country, and everybody knows they've spent some money on Uber or Lyft or whatever, right? Cybercrime made more money than Uber, flat out, hands down, like, end of story, right? And that is just, so if what we had in place for cybersecurity actually worked, like, that wouldn't be true, right? But it is true, which means, and we're not doing anything fundamentally different. And that old quote, like, if you're doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, that's the definition of stupidity. So when you think about what we're actually doing to add cybersecurity in those domains, there's no new idea. There's a new box. Oh, last year you bought an intrusion detection system. Well, this year it's an intrusion protection system. And this year it's got an AI targeting model that's fed by all these sensors we have. And, the sales strategy goes on, but the outcome isn't changing. And if we don't do something fundamentally different, then we shouldn't expect a different outcome. And when you stop trying, you've lost the war. So we've lost that war. The third war, and this is the one that we've got to be really concerned about, because this is the existential one that hasn't been fought yet, is that usually you win a war by operationalizing either a cultural phenomenon that you've uniquely found a way to militarize, or a technological phenomenon that you found a way to operationalize. In the United States, for example, one of my favorite examples of a war we won was the 1991 Gulf War. In the 1991 Gulf War, since Kaylee, were you born in 1991? Okay, so I'm going to refresh for the next gen in the crowd, right? Okay. So in the 1991 Gulf War, we had a political objective that said we want to eject the forces of Iraq from the sovereign state of Kuwait, right? We had all sorts of, you can question the motives of why we wanted to do that, but it was a clear and unambiguous, strategic outcome that we achieved very, very quickly. Right? And what happened in that war is the United States combined arms with the UK, Australia, and a few other partners actually went to war against what was then, and most people don't realize this, the fourth largest army in the world. I think Iraq was the fourth largest standing army in the world. And they were armed with all of the equipment that they bought from the Soviets that we thought we would have been fighting in World War III. So they weren't a knockoff like they were when we went back to them in 2003. We were pretty concerned about that. Colin Powell, historically said he bought 50,000 body bags for that, right? And what happened was we fought a land war that was the largest margin of victory of a land war ever. The coalition that Colin Powell put together and that the United States led won a land war to a larger extent than Caesar ever won a land war. Won a land war to a larger extent than Alexander the Great ever won a land war, right? You can think of any general in history, and they were outperformed by Colin Powell and that coalition if you're just counting casualties one versus the other, right? And the reason why was because it had a lot to do with cultural things in the Army coming out of Vietnam. There's a lot of great books about it. But the thing that worked great was there was a series of technological innovations, which is why I love following the innovation guy on this talk, that we had accelerated and deployed into the operational forces that allowed human beings on our side to do things human beings had never done before. You could take a kid from Kentucky, drop him off in the middle of the desert, and he could see in the dark and not get lost. Like a human being had never had a thing that told him exactly what time it was and where he was in the world, and a set of glasses they could put on and see in the middle of the dark. Meanwhile, we were flying balls in space all over the place, and it was the first time we had done direct targeting operations for those. So we had persistence, omnipresent surveillance, and we built missiles that we didn't have to pick a building. We could fly a Tomahawk through the window of our choice. Right? Nobody had ever been able to target that accurately in the history of warfare. And so you had this series of innovations that gave us this huge edge because we had a culture of innovation coming out of World War II that was evidenced by all sorts of stuff you've never thought about. Like washing machines and lawnmowers and televisions and radios, and think about all of the things that came out in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and early 80s that just revolutionized life. Our culture was about building new things and getting them to market quickly, and so we had a corporate industry panel, team that could do that with government, just like we could do in the commercial world, and it produced a series of kit, most of which was the first time, and this is actually important for everybody in this room, it was the first time human beings had ever built anything out of code, right? So if you think of code as a building material, it was created in 1960, right? About 1960 was when we got off punch cards, and we're like, I think we just type instead of make punch cards, right? So we created codes. Punch cards were codes too, but by the time you got to, I'm going to sit in a terminal, I'm going to type characters, and those characters are going to be interpreted as action by this machine. And now we're going to start building stuff out of that, right? So it was the first time we'd ever built anything out of code, and it turns out you could do a lot of things in code that you couldn't do in circuits. And so we were able to create that digital infrastructure and deploy it with the pace of innovation because it was culturally aligned, right? So now I love the quantum question. I go to, if you want to know what's going on with quantum, I recommend the B2C conference, Business to Quantum, Q to B, B2C. They actually flip it around. It's in Silicon Valley once a year. It's when Google just rolled out their one logical qubit computer that they've just built. But there are 4 or 5, and this is the talk I was given to the submarine community. There are 4 or 5 digital innovations that are going to be the things that accelerate the capability to win at that margin of victory again, and more importantly, deter conflict, right? When China thinks that they can actually win, they probably will try. And so the real goal is to actually create a force that they feel deterred by. And there are 4 or 5 things that, when and if they work, will be deterring factors. 1, Quantum, we talked about that. There's 3 kinds of quantum. I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to stay on time. But there's 3 elements of quantum. There's quantum computing, which solves probabilistic problems better than anything we ever have. Shor's algorithm, which is the algorithm to break modern encryption, is a probabilistic algorithm. There's no probabilistic computer that can do it. A quantum computer would solve Shor's algorithm, and therefore that's why you can break you could break any modern encryption. That quantum computing is a decent way off. To build a quantum computer, you have to error correct for a bunch of different variances that make quantum computers go wonky, like heat, vibration, sound, et cetera. That's why you have to run them in these big fridges. So in decades of figuring out what stimulates quantum bits to do weird things, you start figuring out, acceleration makes this quantum bit shake. Oh, I could actually measure how much it shakes. Now I could measure acceleration like 10 to 100x better than I could with any other device. So quantum sensors are the derivative of our experimentation in quantum error correction. Those will be here in the next few years. So the resilient PNT, those sort of things, that'll all come from quantum sensors. And then the third is about quantum communications using entangled particles that are the same thing in 2 different places at the same time, which is just so cool, right? So when and if we militarize quantum in one or two of those things, it'll be an absolute game changer. AI and generalized autonomy. We're seeing large language models. Large language models don't win wars, but generalized autonomy probably could, right? If we can achieve decision superiority at the pace of relevance against our adversaries, it'll win. You have, so you've got AI. I would say autonomy and AI are pretty close, but they are distinctly different. So if we can actually deploy fleets of thousands of things, we overcomplicate the targeting problem in a way that's just transformational. There's a bunch of operational problems with that, but that's a part of it. So the autonomy thing is a little bit different in that way. And then we have national systems. We have tons and tons of things that are very, very secretive things we do, SAP, STO programs, and other things that we have on our side. All of our allies have those. My experience, having been a pack fleet operational planner for years, is I call that the J39 sprinkle sauce. Like there's the plan, and then the cyber guy comes in and says, ooh, I could drop some color sprinkles on that, and then the SAP guy does that same thing, right? That's not a way to win. Like sprinkles don't win. If we actually have something that fundamentally is a technological superior thing, then we have to have an integration pattern for getting that scaled across the force and the fleet, like tomorrow. Or if our allies figure something out, we need the ability to do that. But right now, our modernization, our systems, all of our ACAT-1 fighting programs take 10 or 15 years to modernize. So let's talk about what it means, kind of in my last 5 minutes, to build a warfighting engine that is designed to win in the digital age. The first thing is our major warfighting systems have to be upgradable by, well, let's start over on that. Every system we have right now, most of them run Red Hat Linux, right, as kind of in the back plane. Whether it's a machinery control system or whether it's an AI command and control system, most of them run Linux, right? And mostly it's Red Hat Linux. Red Hat is a consulting company, not a technology company, that does a consulting around Linus Torvalds' after-school project. Right, that became Linus Torvalds' after-school project, became the world's after-school project, and that's what Linux is. And now we've decided that's the foundation of freedom today. Well, that's just a stupid idea, right? That is just stupid. And Windows is worse, right? And so we need a new operating system. And one of the things Chris Cleary was talking about today was we need to be like overt. Like, no, we're building this operating system for weapon systems. So I'm doing that. So I have the Navy's first program of record AI. So we put AI on warships. It's the first POR, not demo, to ever do that. It's predictive maintenance. Happy to talk about it later. I built 6 or 7 different DoD AI pilots. And every time I do it, I hate the tech stack I deploy it on. So I just raised a bunch of money to go build a new operating system. So I'm building Tempest OS. So if anybody wants to try Tempest OS, or anybody wants to give me an application that they want to run on Tempest OS, I'm all ears. But at the end of the day, we need an operating system that's actually not designed to fight and win, right? The second thing is we've got to have a platform as a service integration model. The reason why, so a friend of mine is a managing partner at Andreessen Horowitz. And one of the things he says in Austin, because that's where we're at, he's like, when he comes down to talk to startups, he goes, it's cheaper to start a startup now than it's ever been. And the reason why is the cloud. right? I know I've got a drink if it's like cloud or whatever, but the truth is, like, AWS makes it cheaper to start a startup than it ever has been, because you can just take so many Lego blocks and then just turn your database on for free, basically. Amazon is going to give you $100,000 for the credits as a new startup, right? So you get everything that you used to have to hire a network engineer and an infrastructure engineer and a database administrator and everything else. That's all free. Amazon does that. So you can innovate faster than ever. It's just super expensive to achieve global scale to reach an IPO. But we don't have that model in the DoD. So everything my boy was talking about here a minute ago about like prepping to ATO assumes you've got an organization that's actually large enough to get an ATO. And what does that ATO mean? It means you get Red Hat and you hire 5 very expensive cybersecurity engineers to go turn a bunch of switches and swirl a bunch of knobs to create a general purpose operating system that's acceptable in the DoD, and it still kind of sucks. Right? So my question is, like, should you turn off SSH where someone can escalate privilege and then just turn it back on? Or should you just not have SSH in the system? And so we're building Tempest OS that is actually purpose-built for DoD use cases, so it's truly immutable and provides a foundation. The second piece of that is platform as a service integration. Almost all hyperscale cloud environments run on containerization. Everybody who's a geek in here knows that. There is no platform for containerization, secure containerization and runtime operations on submarine ships, aircraft, tanks, strikers, new vehicles, or all these a bazillion unmanned systems. So Tempest OS is both the operating system layer, and Tempest OS is secure virtualization, OS inside each virtual node, and container orchestration, and a tightly vertically integrated immutable package designed to fight in DoD that's got some special sauce in it. And then the last part of that is, if we're going to do agentic systems, you have to have created an organizational authorization model to let people send, so people can use, so we can send it out. So I was joking with Kaylee before. I'll celebrate her for a minute. Kaylee was the ISSM for a little while for the Columbia program. It's the most expensive submarine that's ever been built in the world. She was the security manager for it, and she adopted a program that I wrote a couple years ago called ASAP, NAVC, Accelerated Software Authorization Pathway. And she got code committed by a developer, approved ATO, working in the production environment for a Columbia test facility in 2 days. Because we moved, yeah, cool, right? That's pretty freaking cool, right? Because we moved the 2 days.
That's the number after 1 before 3.
That's the one, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, okay.
Because what she did was she worked within kind of the paradigm that we got in NAVC. We basically, when I did an AI project for NAVC, I basically said, I'm not willing to do this unless you change the cyber authorization model, where you move the assessment to the software factory. I'm happy to make sure the code that got built hits every threshold you wanted. Right? So that's what we're doing. We think the foundation of winning the next digital war is a secure foundation designed for combat operations that orchestrates a container environment tied to a cybersecurity authorization model that allows innovation to hit ACAT 1 programs at the pace of relevance. And I'd love to talk to anybody after it or dive in on anything else. Thanks. Or we can geek out about quantum. Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Zach Staples, everyone.
Yeah.